My name is Susan, and I am 66 years old. As a retired curator of ethnographic collections, I dedicated my career to understanding, preserving, and appreciating diverse human cultures. I traveled the world challenging stereotypes and building bridges between communities that had never understood each other. I instilled in my sons, Andrew and Mark, a deep appreciation for diversity, teaching them that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. For decades, I consistently hosted annual traditional Thanksgiving dinners, meticulously planning harmonious, unifying experiences that celebrated not just our family, but the beautiful tapestry of human culture I'd spent my life studying. Then this past November, Andrew brought his new girlfriend Maria, a kind, intelligent immigrant from Mexico who had captured his heart with her gentle spirit and brilliant mind. But Mark, my eldest son, immediately launched a vicious attack that shattered everything I'd tried to build in our family. "You're just after his money and a green card. Go back to where you came from," he screamed at Maria across my carefully set Thanksgiving table. Arthur, my conservative husband, muttered his agreement. "This is chaos. This isn't what Thanksgiving should be." My grandson Ethan scoffed with teenage cruelty. "Her culture is so primitive. Why do we have to deal with this?" My granddaughter Chloe giggled and added, "Yeah, Grandma, you're so naive to think this is okay." My lifelong dedication to cultural understanding, my professional values, my carefully nurtured family harmony, all tragically undermined and attacked by blatant bigotry from the very people I'd raised to be better. I felt profoundly disrespected, culturally invalidated, and utterly helpless as I watched my own family destroy an innocent young woman with their hatred. Yet, as despair threatened to consume my broken heart, an ethnographic curator's unwavering drive for truth ignited a cold fury within me. What Mark, Arthur, Chloe, Ethan, and even Andrew didn't know was my secret. Extensive ethnographic field notes on prejudice and integration patterns, documenting exactly how bigotry spreads through families. And my discreet voice recorder had captured Mark's blatant prejudiced remarks, his explicit insults to Maria, and the children's disrespectful comments, revealing their shocking lack of humanity. My network of diversity consultants and a family therapist ally waited in the shadows. This time their insidious bigotry wouldn't just unravel, it would expose their biases, heal the profound rifts they'd created, and rebuild our family on a foundation of genuine respect, proving that cultural appreciation triumphs over prejudice, even when that prejudice comes from those we love most. The silence that followed Thanksgiving dinner was deafening, broken only by Maria's quiet sobs as Andrew hurriedly escorted her from my home. I stood in my kitchen surrounded by the remnants of a meal I'd spent weeks planning, watching my family's true nature emerge like poison from a wound I hadn't known existed. 3 days later, I attempted to salvage what remained of our family by calling a meeting at my home. I had spent 40 years studying how prejudice tears communities apart, and I thought I could apply that knowledge to heal my own family. I was wrong. Mark arrived first, his face set in the same expression of righteous anger he'd worn at dinner. Andrew followed reluctantly, his eyes unable to meet mine as he took a seat on the opposite side of the room from his brother. Arthur remained standing by the window, his body language radiating disapproval and distance. "Mark." I began, my voice steady, despite the storm in my heart. "We need to talk about what happened at Thanksgiving. The way you spoke to Maria was unacceptable. She's a guest in our home, and more importantly, she's important to Andrew." Mark's response was immediate and brutal. "A guest, Mom. She's not a guest, she's an invader. She's just after Andrew's money and a green card. Can't you see that? That's not true. I said, trying to keep my professional composure. Maria has her own career, her own. You foreigners always try to take over, Mark interrupted, his voice rising to a shout. They come here with their weird food, their strange customs, trying to change everything we've built. Go back to where you came from. The words hit me like physical blows. This was my son, the boy I'd raised to respect and celebrate diversity, spouting the kind of ignorant hatred I'd spent my career fighting against. But he wasn't finished. You have no humanity for our traditions. You're allowing this leech to ruin our family. She's probably diseased, probably here illegally, probably has 10 kids back in Mexico. She's trying to bring over. Arthur's contribution was quieter, but equally devastating. This isn't Thanksgiving, he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. This is chaos. This is why we shouldn't mix cultures. It's disrespectful to everything we stand for as Americans. I turned to Andrew, hoping my younger son would defend the woman he claimed to love. Instead, he looked uncomfortable and defensive. Mom, maybe you're overreacting a little. It was just a cultural misunderstanding. Mark's not wrong about being careful about people's motivations. The betrayal cut deeper than Mark's open bigotry. Andrew was choosing his family's approval over Maria's dignity, abandoning the principles I'd taught him the moment they became inconvenient. But it was my grandchildren's participation that truly broke my heart. Ethan, now 16 and full of teenage cruelty, looked at me with obvious disdain. Grandma, why do we have to deal with her weird culture? This is so embarrassing. She probably doesn't even speak English properly. She's obviously here for Dad's money. You old fool. Chloe, my sweet 14-year-old granddaughter, giggled and nodded in agreement. Yeah, Grandma, her culture is so primitive. Like who eats with their hands at Thanksgiving? You're so naive to think this is normal. The casual cruelty in their voices was devastating. These children, whom I'd taken to museums and cultural festivals, whom I'd taught about the beauty of human diversity, were parroting their father's bigotry with the confidence of youth who had never been challenged. Mark then delivered his final blow. Mom, I think you're losing your mind if you think Maria's presence is acceptable. Maybe your age is affecting your judgment. You used to understand what family meant. The implication was clear. My professional expertise, my decades of experience with diverse cultures, my very sanity were all being questioned because I refused to participate in their hatred. As the days passed, Mark's demands became increasingly unreasonable and controlling. He and Arthur refused to allow Maria at any future family gatherings, treating her like a contamination that needed to be prevented from spreading. If you want to see your grandchildren, Mark told me during a particularly painful phone call, you need to make a choice. Either that woman stays away from our family events or you do. We won't have our traditions polluted by outsiders. He began threatening to sever all ties with Andrew if the relationship continued putting pressure on my younger son to choose between his family and his heart. Mark also enlisted Lisa, his sister, who lived across the country, to help spread rumors about Maria's character and my supposed mental decline. Mom's gotten too old and liberal, I heard he told Lisa. She can't see the truth about people anymore. She thinks everyone deserves to be welcomed, even when they're obviously just using us. The rumors spread through our extended family like wildfire. Maria was portrayed as aggressive, disrespectful, and manipulative, while I was painted as a confused elderly woman who could no longer distinguish between genuine kindness and calculated exploitation. Andrew became increasingly distant, avoiding my phone calls and making excuses when I tried to visit. When I finally managed to corner him at the grocery store, his explanation was devastating in its casual dismissal of everything I'd tried to teach him. Mom, "You're overreacting to a simple cultural misunderstanding," he said, unable to meet my eyes. "Mark's just being protective of the family. Maybe you should try to see his point of view instead of being so defensive about your professional opinions." Professional opinions. As if my 40 years of studying human culture were nothing more than a hobby that had gotten out of hand. The isolation was crushing. Family gatherings were rescheduled without me being informed. Holiday plans were made around my absence. The children I'd helped raise were being taught to see me as an obstacle to family harmony rather than someone who had spent her life trying to build bridges between different worlds. But even as my family crumbled around me, my professional instincts remained sharp. I recognized the patterns Mark was using, the dehumanization of the outsider, the appeals to tradition and purity, the systematic isolation of anyone who challenged the group's prejudices. These were classic techniques used by people who wanted to maintain power and control, and I documented them in dozens of communities around the world. The woman who had spent her career studying how bigotry destroys families was now watching her own family tear itself apart with the same poisonous hatred. But I was Susan Martinez, and I hadn't spent 40 years fighting prejudice to surrender to it when it came from my own children. Mark had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman who had taught him everything he knew about standing up for what's right. He was about to learn that those lessons, even if he'd rejected them, had been taught by someone who embodied them completely. Mark's campaign against Maria and my defense of her escalated into something far more sinister than simple family disagreement. Within weeks of our confrontation, he had transformed his bigotry into a public performance, using social media to broadcast his version of our family's story to anyone willing to listen. The video he posted was a masterpiece of manipulation, showing carefully edited clips from our Thanksgiving dinner that made Maria appear uncomfortable and out of place, while highlighting moments where our family seemed most traditionally American. He captioned it with words that made my blood run cold: "Preserving our heritage from unwelcome influences, family first traditions matter." The footage showed Maria hesitating before sitting down, making her natural politeness look like uncertainty about our customs. It captured moments when she was quiet during our family's rapid-fire conversation, making her appear antisocial, rather than simply overwhelmed by meeting so many new people at once. Mark had weaponized her kindness and turned it into evidence of her inadequacy. Within hours, the video had hundreds of likes and shares. Andrew had not only viewed it, but had added his own like, publicly endorsing his brother's narrative. Chloe shared it with her own cruel commentary: "When outsiders try to ruin family traditions. So awkward." The betrayal was systematic and complete, but Mark's ambitions went beyond social media humiliation. He announced his intention to host all future family holidays at his home with explicit rules about who would and wouldn't be welcome. From now on, he declared in a family group text that included everyone except Maria, "We're going back to traditional family celebrations. No outsiders, no political correctness, no forced diversity, just real Americans celebrating real American values." The message was clear: I could attend these gatherings, but only if I abandoned Maria and accepted my son's definition of what our family should be. The woman who had spent her career fighting against exactly this kind of exclusion was being forced to choose between her principles and her family. It was during this nightmare that I overheard a conversation that shattered my last illusions about my grandson's innocence. Ethan was on the phone with a friend describing our Thanksgiving disaster with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can muster. Yeah, it was totally wild. He laughed. Grandma almost had a stroke because the new girlfriend wanted to eat with her hands or something. She's so old-fashioned, she practically had a meltdown when we told her the truth about foreigners. No humanity for new things. You know, Dad says Grandma's losing her mind because she can't see obvious gold diggers anymore. The words cut through me like a blade. My grandson was parroting his father's lies, but worse than that, he was doing it with genuine conviction. He truly believed that I was the problem, that my refusal to participate in their bigotry was evidence of mental decline rather than moral strength. The conversation confirmed Mark's active participation in my public humiliation and revealed the depth of his manipulation. He wasn't just expressing personal prejudices, he was systematically poisoning the next generation against the values I'd tried to instill in them. As this terrible reality settled into my consciousness, my mind drifted to a secret I'd carried for over 20 years, a sacrifice I'd made for Mark that made his current cruelty feel like cosmic punishment for my own protective instincts. When Mark was 17, during his senior year of high school, he had been caught in a major academic scandal that could have destroyed his future. He'd plagiarized significant portions of his college application essays, lifting entire paragraphs from published sources and presenting them as his own work. Worse, he'd also been involved in an act of vandalism at school that had caused over $50,000 in damage to the computer lab. The scandal broke just weeks before college acceptance letters were due to arrive. Mark faced not only rejection from every university he'd applied to, but also potential criminal charges for the property damage. His future, the bright, promising future I'd worked so hard to nurture, was about to be destroyed by his own poor choices. That's when I made a decision that went against everything I believed in professionally. Using my connections in the academic world, my reputation as a respected curator, and my understanding of institutional politics, I orchestrated an elaborate cover-up. I spent weeks calling in favors, meeting with school officials, and carefully crafting a narrative that would minimize Mark's culpability. I convinced the principal that Mark had been influenced by older students, that he was essentially a victim of peer pressure rather than the primary perpetrator. I paid over $20,000 from my retirement savings to cover the damage costs, ensuring that no criminal charges would be filed. Most importantly, I worked with sympathetic teachers to create alternative versions of Mark's application essays, helping him rewrite them in his own voice while maintaining the same basic content. The plagiarism was quietly buried, and Mark's college applications proceeded as if nothing had happened. For 20 years, I'd carried the weight of that compromise, watching Mark build his successful career on a foundation that I'd helped him construct through deception. I'd convinced myself it was justified because he'd learned from his mistakes, because the young man who emerged from that crisis was better than the teenager who'd created it. Now, as Mark publicly humiliated me for defending basic human dignity, the irony was unbearable. The son I'd protected from the consequences of his own dishonesty was using that protection to attack me for refusing to be dishonest about Maria's worth as a human being. When I tried to reach out to Mark to hint at the sacrifices I'd made for him, without revealing the full truth, his response was swift and brutal. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called sacrifices," he snapped during what would be our final civil conversation. "Your past choices are your own business. Maria says you're trying to manipulate us with guilt and sentimentality, and frankly, I think she's right about your mental state." The fact that he was using Maria's name to justify his cruelty, pretending she had said things she would never say, revealed the depth of his dishonesty. Lisa, his sister, piled on with her own dismissive assessment. Honestly, Mom, you're getting quite paranoid about this whole diversity thing. We're worried about your mental health. You're just trying to twist history to make us look bad when we're trying to protect the family from obvious manipulation. Arthur, my husband of 35 years, remained silent through these exchanges, his passive complicity somehow more devastating than Mark's active cruelty. The man I'd loved and supported through his own hidden shames was now standing by while his son destroyed me for defending someone else. The final insult came when Mark sent me a formal legal proposal through his attorney. If I would publicly apologize for my disruptive behavior and lack of cultural sensitivity, despite being a professional anthropologist, and agree to have only supervised contact with Maria, he would consider allowing me to attend future family gatherings. The document was designed to legally trap me in a narrative of incompetence and cultural irrelevance. It would force me to admit that my professional expertise was worthless, that my judgment about human character was flawed, and that my principles were nothing more than stubborn delusions. Your family is offering you a way to remain part of their lives, the attorney explained during our phone call. They understand that your professional background might make it difficult for you to see certain situations clearly. This agreement would help everyone move forward with appropriate boundaries. Appropriate boundaries. As if loving and defending an innocent person was a psychological disorder that needed to be contained through legal intervention. As I sat in my home that night, surrounded by artifacts from dozens of cultures I'd studied over the decades, I felt the full weight of what my family had become. The people I'd raised to appreciate human diversity had grown into individuals who were willing to destroy their own mother for refusing to participate in their hatred. But I was Susan Martinez, and I'd spent 40 years documenting how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary cruelty when they convince themselves that their prejudices are justified. My own family was about to learn that the woman they were trying to silence had more fight left in her than they'd ever imagined. The legal papers that arrived on a cold December morning represented the complete annihilation of everything I'd tried to build as a mother, a professional, and a human being. Mark's attorney had obtained a temporary restraining order against me based on fabricated claims of cultural harassment and emotional distress caused by my intrusive behavior. The language was clinical and devastating. Susan Martinez is hereby prohibited from attending family gatherings, contacting Mark Martinez or his immediate family members, or approaching within 500 feet of their residence or children's school. Violation of this order constitutes criminal harassment and will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. I was being legally banned from seeing my own grandchildren, forbidden from attending family celebrations I'd organized for decades, effectively made a criminal for defending a young woman's basic human dignity. The restraining order transformed my love for my family into a legal liability, my principles into evidence of mental instability. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. In my desperation to reach whatever remained of Mark's humanity, I created a small album of our most precious memories together. Photos of him as a baby in my arms, pictures from family trips to museums and cultural sites, images that captured the love and care I'd poured into raising him to be a better person than his father and I had been. I wrote a heartfelt letter to accompany the album, pouring my soul onto paper in hopes that seeing our shared history might remind him of the values I'd tried to instill. My dearest Mark. I wrote, I know you're angry and confused, but please remember who we were to each other before this hatred consumed you. Look at these pictures and remember the conversations we had about treating all people with dignity. Remember the museums we visited, the stories I told you about different cultures, the pride you once took in being open-minded and fair. I love you more than you'll ever know, and nothing you do will change that. Please don't let fear and prejudice destroy the beautiful person I know you can be. I left the album at his house on a Sunday evening when I knew the family would be at dinner, hoping that seeing our history might penetrate the wall of hatred he'd built around his heart. 3 days later, I found my answer on Mark's social media page. There, posted for all our friends and family to see, was a photograph that destroyed the last piece of my heart. My precious album lay torn and scattered in a garbage bin, the photographs I'd cherished for decades, ripped apart like worthless trash. Mark's caption was a dagger thrust directly into my soul. Cleaning out the clutter. Some people just can't let go of the past. Moving forward from negativity and desperate attempts to manipulate. Time to focus on what really matters, protecting our family from toxic influences. In that moment, I understood that my son hadn't just rejected me, he had actively participated in the destruction of our shared history. Every birthday party I'd thrown him, every cultural lesson I'd shared, every moment of love and guidance I'd provided, all of it meant nothing to him now. Arthur's public response was delivered through my sister-in-law, a calculated move designed to maximize the humiliation while maintaining his own plausible deniability. Arthur wants everyone to know that he supports Mark's decision completely. She announced at a family gathering I wasn't allowed to attend. Sometimes family peace requires difficult choices, and protecting the grandchildren from inappropriate influences is more important than enabling destructive behavior. Mark's final message came as a text that somehow reached me despite all the legal barriers they'd erected. Consider this closed, Mom. Don't contact us again, ever. You're causing too much trouble with your cultural opinions and your inability to accept reality. The cruelest blow came from Ethan, my 16-year-old grandson, whom I'd once hoped would carry forward the values of tolerance and understanding I'd tried to teach. When he saw me at the grocery store, instead of the warm greeting I'd hoped for, he looked at me with teenage contempt. "Grandma, you're crazy," he said loud enough for other shoppers to hear. "Why don't you just die already? Your culture obsession is so primitive and embarrassing. Nobody wants you around anymore." The words hit me like physical blows. This child, whom I'd taken to cultural festivals and museums, whose homework I'd helped with countless times, whose mind I'd tried to open to the beauty of human diversity, was now wishing death on his own grandmother for refusing to participate in hatred. Sitting alone in my house that night, surrounded by the artifacts and memories of a lifetime spent fighting against exactly this kind of bigotry, I confronted the deepest and most painful secret of my marriage. The truth about Arthur, a truth that made his current betrayal feel like the final chapter in a story of sacrifice and disappointment that had defined my entire adult life. Throughout our 35-year marriage, Arthur had maintained a secret life that would have destroyed his public image as a community leader and family man. He'd struggled with a profound sexual addiction that manifested in multiple affairs, inappropriate relationships with younger women, and a pattern of behavior that had repeatedly put our family at risk of public scandal. I discovered his first affair when Mark was just 10 years old, finding evidence that left no doubt about Arthur's infidelity. But instead of confronting him publicly or leaving him as I should have, I'd made a choice that would haunt me for decades. I decided to protect his reputation and our children's innocence by covering up his behavior. For 25 years, I'd been Arthur's silent accomplice in maintaining his false image. When rumors surfaced about his relationships with staff members at his office, I used my connections in the academic community to quietly discredit the stories. When he was nearly caught in compromising situations, I provided alibis and explanations that protected his standing in the community. I'd sacrificed my own emotional truth, my marital happiness, and my self-respect to ensure that Arthur could continue to present himself as a faithful husband and devoted father. I'd endured the private humiliation of knowing my marriage was a lie while publicly supporting the fiction that we were a happy, stable family. The irony was devastating. I'd spent decades protecting Arthur from the consequences of his choices, covering up behavior that violated every principle of fidelity and honesty I believed in. And now when I refused to cover up my family's bigotry, when I stood up for basic human decency, Arthur was repaying my loyalty by passively supporting my destruction. The woman who had sacrificed her emotional integrity to protect her husband's reputation was being abandoned by that same husband for refusing to sacrifice her moral integrity to protect her son's prejudices. As I sat surrounded by the remnants of a life dedicated to understanding and celebrating human diversity, I made a vow that echoed through the depths of my broken heart. My family might have succeeded in isolating me, might have destroyed our relationships and perverted our history, but they had not broken my spirit. I was Susan Martinez, and I'd spent 40 years fighting against the kind of hatred they now embodied. My own family was about to learn that the woman they were trying to silence had faced worse enemies than them and emerged victorious. The truth would come out, all of it, and when it did, the people who had betrayed me would finally understand the difference between genuine love and toxic loyalty, between family unity and complicit silence in the face of injustice. The silence of my empty house had become a psychological prison where every artifact from my career, every photograph from my travels, every reminder of the life I'd built, studying human culture, now mocked me with evidence of my own failure. My family's legal banishment had left me utterly alone with the monumental, agonizing weight of Arthur's secret and my decades of complicity in maintaining his false image. The weight of concealed truth was crushing my spirit day by day. How could I fight accusations of mental instability when my entire marriage had been built on lies I'd helped perpetuate? How could I defend my professional expertise in understanding human behavior when I'd spent 35 years enabling my husband's deception? The woman who had dedicated her career to seeking cultural truth had spent her personal life living a carefully constructed falsehood. The doubt was eating me alive. Had I been wrong to protect Arthur from the consequences of his choices? Had my silence about his affairs enabled the moral corruption I was seeing in my children? As an anthropologist, I'd spent my career helping others understand the complex dynamics of human relationships, but now I couldn't untangle the web of my own family's dysfunction. Arthur's passive complicity in my destruction felt like the final cruel irony. I had sacrificed my emotional integrity to protect his reputation, and now he was repaying that loyalty by standing silently while Mark destroyed mine. Mark and Arthur escalated their campaign with the precision of people who understood exactly how to destroy a professional reputation. Mark began subtly leaking details of my erratic behavior to anthropology associations and cultural studies programs where my former colleagues gathered to discuss research and share experiences. "I'm worried about Dr. Martinez," he would say in carefully worded phone calls to academic contacts. "She's been showing signs of cognitive decline and developing these unstable theories about cultural relativism. The family has had to get legal protection because she's become obsessive about forcing her political views on everyone around her. The implications were devastating. My reputation for intellectual rigor and ethical scholarship, built over 40 years of dedicated research, was being systematically destroyed by suggestions that I'd become the very thing I'd spent my career warning against, a scholar whose judgment had been compromised by political ideology rather than scientific objectivity. Academic groups began quietly removing my name from their advisory boards. The Regional Anthropological Society canceled my Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony without explanation. Cultural events that had once sought my consultation on sensitivity and inclusion issues stopped calling. The network of respect and trust I'd spent my entire career building was being dismantled, one whispered concern at a time. Dr. Martinez used to be so balanced in her approach, I heard through a former colleague, but lately she's become almost militant about these diversity issues. The family is concerned she's developing some kind of fixation that's affecting her judgment about appropriate cultural boundaries. The financial noose tightened with every passing day. The legal fees for defending myself against the restraining order and Mark's defamation lawsuit had completely drained my savings. My bank accounts were frozen, pending the resolution of Mark's claims about my financial impropriety and his reports of suspicious activity that he claimed indicated mental decline. The eviction notice arrived on a gray February morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who treated me like the dangerous person my family claimed I was. My home, filled with artifacts from cultures around the world, with books that documented humanity's beautiful diversity, was being taken to pay debts I'd incurred fighting for basic human decency. The public auction of my possessions was a humiliation beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Strangers bid on the masks I'd collected in West Africa, the textiles I'd acquired in South America, the photographs that documented my life's work, studying how different cultures find common ground. Everything that represented my identity as a scholar and a bridge builder was reduced to lot numbers and garage sale prices. I watched from across the street as they carried out my research files, decades of fieldwork that had helped other families navigate cultural differences and find understanding. The buyers had no idea they were purchasing the tools that had once helped heal the very kind of divisions that were now destroying my own family. But the cruelest blow came when Mark and Lisa orchestrated a public relations stunt that turned even my beloved grandchildren into weapons against everything I'd stood for. They organized a cultural purity charity event for a local heritage preservation group, supposedly to raise awareness about maintaining authentic American traditions. Ethan, now 17, and displaying his father's gift for performance, stood before a crowd of community leaders and recited a carefully rehearsed speech about preserving our true heritage and avoiding foreign influences that threaten our family values. Sometimes love means making difficult decisions, he said, looking directly into the camera with practiced sincerity. Sometimes we have to move beyond compromise and political correctness to protect what really matters. Our heritage isn't something we can negotiate away to make outsiders feel comfortable. Chloe, my sweet 15-year-old granddaughter, presented a drawing she'd made of a happy, homogeneous family. The crayon figures showed Mark, Lisa, Arthur, and their children all holding hands around an American flag with one conspicuous absence. When asked about the missing figure, Chloe replied with practiced innocence, "Some people choose to put strangers before family. We believe in putting our own people first." The public program display of emotional distance by the children I'd loved unconditionally shattered what remained of my soul. These were the kids I'd taken to international festivals, whose school projects about different cultures I'd helped with, whose minds I'd tried to open to the beauty of human diversity. Now they were performing for cameras, reciting lines that portrayed me as a traitor to my own family and country. But in my darkest hour, when I was living in a crowded public shelter and contemplating whether there was any point in continuing to fight, an unexpected lifeline appeared. Dr. Carmen Rodriguez, a former anthropology student I'd mentored 25 years ago, reached out after seeing news coverage of my situation. "Professor Martinez," she said during a tearful phone call, "I don't care what they're saying about you. You saved my academic career when I was struggling with discrimination, and you taught me that standing up for cultural understanding is worth any cost. If you're being attacked like this, it's because someone wants to silence a voice that threatens their prejudices." Carmen's support came with more than just words. Her career had flourished in the years since graduation, and she now ran a successful cultural integration consulting firm. She insisted on providing financial backing for my legal defense and had connections in the legal community who specialized in elder abuse and defamation cases. "Your case isn't just about you," Carmen explained during our first meeting with the legal team she'd assembled. "It's about protecting every voice that speaks for cultural understanding and human dignity. Families like yours tear apart communities by making prejudice seem normal and acceptable." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Somewhere beyond the walls of my isolation, beyond my family's lies and manipulation, there were people who remembered the real Susan Martinez, who understood what I'd stood for throughout my career, who were willing to fight for justice. The woman who had spent her life studying how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary cruelty when they convince themselves their prejudices are justified, was about to show her own family that she wasn't as defenseless as they'd assumed. The final battle was approaching, and I intended to enter it with every weapon in my considerable arsenal. My family had made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the woman who had spent 40 years documenting how hatred spreads through communities and how it can be defeated by people brave enough to stand against it. They were about to learn that those lessons had been learned by someone who embodied them completely. The attack on my professional legacy reached its crescendo when Mark and Arthur orchestrated a highly publicized cultural purity and tradition gala, positioning themselves as guardians of authentic heritage while systematically destroying everything I'd stood for during my 40-year career. The event was sophisticated in its cruelty, using my own field of expertise as the venue for my public execution. From the homeless shelter where I now lived, I learned about the gala through Carmen Rodriguez, who had been monitoring my family's activities as part of our legal preparation. The promotional materials were breathtaking in their audacity. Mark listed as the keynote speaker on protecting family values from cultural dilution, Arthur presenting a workshop on maintaining strong cultural boundaries, and both of them moderating panels on the dangers of unchecked diversity. They were using my decades of research into cultural integration as a case study, but twisted beyond recognition to support their narrative that I had become a dangerous advocate for cultural relativism gone wrong, who threatened the stability of traditional American families. Carmen helped me access a live stream of the event from a computer at the public library, and what I witnessed was the systematic dismantling of everything I dedicated my life to building. Mark stood behind the podium with the confidence of someone who truly believed his own propaganda, presenting a fabricated version of our family's experience that bore no resemblance to reality. My mother, he said, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow, was once a respected scholar who understood the importance of cultural boundaries. But as she aged, she became increasingly obsessed with forcing diversity onto our family, even when it clearly threatened our stability and values. He showed carefully edited photographs from family gatherings where Maria had been present, using her natural politeness and cultural differences to make her appear threatening and disruptive. The slides were accompanied by statistics about the dangers of unchecked cultural integration and the psychological trauma experienced by traditional families forced to accommodate incompatible worldviews. Professional anthropological research, Mark continued, must be balanced against practical family realities. When academic theory conflicts with the lived experience of real families, we must have the courage to choose what works over what sounds progressive. Arthur's presentation was even more devastating. He spoke about the importance of recognizing when cultural sensitivity becomes cultural surrender and protecting children from confusing messages about identity and belonging. Sometimes, Arthur said with practiced authority, the people who claim to be fighting for tolerance are actually the ones creating division and conflict. My wife's inability to accept appropriate cultural boundaries nearly destroyed our family's peace and our children's sense of security. He presented my 40 years of research into successful cultural integration as irresponsible academic theory that ignored the real-world consequences of forcing families to accept incompatible values. My careful documentation of how prejudice spreads through communities was twisted into evidence that I'd become blind to the legitimate concerns that families have about maintaining their cultural identity. The sight of my own life's work being perverted into a cautionary tale was almost unbearable. These people who had contributed nothing to the field of anthropology, who had learned everything they knew about culture from me, were now presenting themselves as experts while using my dedication to understanding human diversity as an example of what not to do. But the cruelest moment came when they featured my grandchildren in pre-recorded videos that would be shown to the gala audience. Ethan appeared on the screen, his young face serious as he spoke about his newfound appreciation for strong convictions and the importance of moving beyond wishy-washy compromises. I used to think that being open-minded meant accepting everything. He said the words clearly coached, but delivered with teenage conviction. But I've learned that real strength comes from knowing what you believe and not letting other people make you feel guilty for protecting your family's values. Chloe's segment was shorter, but equally crushing. She held up one of my old anthropology textbooks, a comprehensive study of cultural integration that I'd used throughout my career, and giggled as she pointed to the complex research diagrams. Grandma used to read this, she laughed. So old-fashioned and complicated. We prefer pure culture that doesn't try to mix everything together. They were using my own grandchildren to mock my professional expertise, reducing 40 years of specialized knowledge to old-fashioned thinking that had been superseded by their superior understanding of cultural reality. Dr. Richard Hayes, a respected retired anthropologist who had collaborated with me on several cross-cultural studies, served as an expert witness during the gala's accompanying professional seminar. But instead of defending the principles we'd worked together to establish, he spoke in carefully coded language about the dangers of academic idealism overriding practical family concerns. We occasionally encounter situations, he said with practiced diplomacy, where well-meaning scholars become so invested in theoretical models that they lose sight of the human cost of their recommendations. Cultural sensitivity is important, but it must be balanced against the legitimate needs of established family systems. The implication was clear. I was the problem academic that other professionals dreaded, the idealistic researcher who put theory ahead of real-world consequences and damaged families through my unrealistic expectations about cultural acceptance. Watching this systematic destruction of my reputation and legacy, I felt something break inside me that went deeper than heartbreak. These people had taken not just my family and my home, but my very identity as a competent ethical scholar. They were erasing 40 years of dedicated research and replacing it with a narrative that painted me as everything I'd spent my career fighting against. But even as I sat in that library chair, trembling with rage and despair, I held on to the knowledge that Carmen Rodriguez and her legal team were documenting every lie, every distortion, every manipulation. The same professional expertise that was being mocked and dismissed would eventually be vindicated by people who understood the difference between genuine scholarship and opportunistic performance. A former colleague, Dr. Maria Santos, had witnessed the gala and was immediately suspicious of the sophisticated nature of the manipulation. She reached out through Carmen, offering to provide a professional affidavit vouching for my academic integrity and mental acuity. Susan Martinez is one of the most rigorous and ethical anthropologists I've ever worked with, she wrote in her statement. The woman being described at this event bears no resemblance to the colleague I've known and respected for over 20 years. This appears to be a coordinated attack on someone whose professional expertise threatens certain political narratives. The woman who had spent her career studying how communities turn against members who challenge their prejudices was watching her own family create a public spectacle that followed the exact patterns I'd documented in my research. But I was Susan Martinez, and I'd faced more sophisticated manipulators than my own family and emerged victorious. This public humiliation would become the evidence that destroyed them, because the truth has a way of surfacing when lies become too elaborate to maintain. My family was about to learn that the woman they were trying to silence had allies they didn't know about and professional credibility they couldn't destroy. The final assault on my financial security came with the coordinated precision of a military campaign designed to leave me with absolutely nothing while enriching the very people who had already stolen my family and my reputation. Mark, armed with Arthur's social connections and his newfound status as a cultural heritage advocate, launched an attack that would strip away my last remaining assets and reduce me to complete destitution. The lawsuit that arrived at the homeless shelter was beyond anything I could have imagined, even in my worst nightmares. $750,000. Mark was suing me for emotional distress and damage to his reputation and future earning potential caused by my alleged cultural insensitivity and financial mismanagement. The legal document was a masterpiece of psychological warfare designed to bankrupt me through legal fees, even if he never collected a penny in damages. The accusations were elaborate and creative, painting me as a master manipulator who had systematically traumatized my family through cultural indoctrination and emotional blackmail. According to his filing, my attempts to defend Maria constituted harassment and cultural bullying, while my professional advocacy for diversity was reckless interference with traditional family values. But the financial assault didn't stop with the lawsuit. Mark contacted my former university and academic associations, presenting himself as a concerned son, worried about my declining mental state and erratic financial behavior. He claimed I was making dangerous decisions and needed to be declared incompetent to manage my own affairs. I'm worried my mother is being taken advantage of by radical political groups. He told the administrators, his voice heavy with false concern. She's been making wild accusations against family members who disagree with her cultural theories, and I'm afraid her judgment about money is as poor as her judgment about appropriate family boundaries. The administrators, seeking to protect themselves from potential liability, immediately launched an investigation into my mental competency. Within weeks, they had suspended my academic pension and begun procedures to revoke it entirely. 40 years of dedicated research of protecting vulnerable communities from cultural exploitation was being erased by bureaucratic fear and Mark's carefully crafted lies. The mounting legal fees were impossible to manage when I had no income and no access to savings. Mark's lawyers made sure every procedure was as expensive and complex as possible, filing endless motions and demanding extensive depositions that would have cost tens of thousands of dollars to defend against properly. The final eviction from the homeless shelter came with the same cruel precision that had marked every other step of Mark's campaign. The shelter had strict policies about residents involved in high-profile legal disputes, and the constant harassment from my family's supporters had made me a liability they couldn't afford to manage. Brenda, Mark's wife, made sure local media would be present when I was removed from my last refuge, framing my homelessness as the natural consequence of my extremist political views and refusal to accept responsibility for destroying my family's peace. It's always sad to see someone's ideology lead them to this kind of situation, Brenda told the local news reporter, her voice dripping with false sympathy. We've tried to help Susan understand that family unity requires compromise, but she refuses to accept that her political agenda isn't more important than her children's well-being. Arthur and Andrew maintained their chilling indifference to my visible suffering with the practiced ease of people who had convinced themselves they were the victims in this scenario. Arthur publicly stated he had no obligation to support someone who had repeatedly threatened the family's stability through political extremism. Andrew posted constantly on social media about his busy schedule and his positive relationships, subtly implying that my situation was the result of my own negative choices. But the cruelest twist came when Brenda unveiled her latest acquisition, a massive custom-built cultural heritage center at the local university dedicated to preserving authentic American traditions against cultural dilution. The facility, worth over $300,000, had been funded entirely by my stolen retirement savings, which they now controlled completely through their fraudulent guardianship claims. She held a grand opening ceremony that was covered by local media, praising Mark's visionary leadership in cultural preservation and his courage in protecting family values against academic extremism. This center represents the future of cultural education, Brenda announced at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing beside a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of those who choose tradition over trend." Mark's work shows what can be accomplished when we prioritize authentic heritage over political correctness. The photos were everywhere, splashed across social media and local newspapers, Mark and Brenda posing with university officials cutting a giant ribbon in front of a state-of-the-art facility built with money that should have ensured my security in old age. My life savings, my pension, my future transformed into their monument to successful cultural warfare. The stress of losing everything, of watching my life's work perverted into a tool for the very prejudice I'd fought against, finally overwhelmed my body. The heart attack came without warning, a crushing pain that felt like my chest was being torn apart from the inside. As paramedics loaded me into an ambulance, I heard one of them radio ahead. Elderly, homeless female, apparent cardiac event. No family contact information available. No family. The words echoed in my mind as consciousness faded. The woman who had sacrificed everything for family was dying alone, abandoned by the very people she tried to teach about love and acceptance. But even as my heart struggled to keep beating, my mind held onto a fragment of memory that sparked something unexpected. Lying on that hospital gurney, I remembered a fieldwork experience from early in my career, a time when I'd risked my life to protect an indigenous community's sacred cultural traditions from exploitation by outside developers who wanted to destroy their land for profit. The pattern was identical to what my family was doing to me. The false accusations of incompetence, the manipulation of institutional systems, the systematic isolation from support networks, while the perpetrators posed as protectors of tradition and family values. I documented that case thoroughly, had helped expose the criminals and protect the community's rights. As my heart fought to keep beating, that fragment of professional memory sparked a dangerous realization. My family wasn't just improvising their cruelty, they were following a proven playbook for cultural oppression, one I'd encountered before in my career. The question was whether I'd survive long enough to use my own professional knowledge against them. But the pattern was clear now, and with it, the path to exposing their crimes and reclaiming my life. Recovery from my heart attack was slow and agonizing, my body rebuilding itself while my mind raced with the terrible clarity that had emerged from my brush with death. The memory of that Indigenous rights case had crystallized into a roadmap for exposing my family's methodology, and I knew I had one final chance to reach Andrew before their scheme reached its ultimate conclusion. From my hospital bed, weak but determined, I decided to record a video message that would either save our family or provide the evidence needed to destroy their lies forever. With the help of Elena, a compassionate nurse who reminded me of my younger self, I created what I hoped would be Andrew's moment of awakening. Andrew. I said, looking directly into the camera despite my physical weakness, I need you to listen to me without your brother or your father or your own fear whispering in your ears. I have something to tell you that will change everything you think you know about what's happened to our family. I played audio recordings I'd made during our family confrontations, their voices captured clearly as they dismissed Maria's humanity and my professional expertise. Mark's xenophobic rants, Arthur's cold dismissal of cultural understanding, Ethan's casual cruelty toward his own grandmother. The recordings painted a picture of a family that had been infected by hatred while attacking the person who tried to defend love. But more importantly, I spoke directly to whatever remained of Andrew's conscience beneath the layers of family pressure and social conformity. I know you're scared, Andrew. I know it's easier to go along with Mark and Arthur than to stand up for what you know is right. But I need you to remember who you used to be before this hatred took over our family. I need you to remember the conversations we had about treating all people with dignity, about the beauty of learning from different cultures, about the courage it takes to defend someone who's being attacked. I hinted at Mark's academic fraud and my own sacrifices without revealing the full scope of what I'd covered up, hoping that some part of Andrew would remember the mother who had always chosen love over convenience. Please don't let other people's prejudices destroy the good man I raised you to be. Please don't let fear turn you into someone who abandons people who need protection. The video was 21 minutes of raw emotion, documented evidence, and a mother's desperate plea for her son to choose love over family approval, truth over comfortable lies. Elena promised to deliver it directly to Andrew through a secure email account, bypassing Mark and Brenda entirely. We planned it carefully, timing the delivery for when he would be alone with Maria, when his conscience might have a chance to speak louder than his family's pressure. But my family's network of manipulation was more extensive than we'd realized. Within hours of Elena sending the message, Brenda had intercepted it through her monitoring of their communications. What happened next was a masterpiece of digital distortion that left me speechless with horror. Brenda took my raw emotional plea and transformed it into the ultimate weapon against me. Using sophisticated editing software, she altered the audio to make me sound paranoid and delusional, splicing sentences together to create statements I'd never made. My appeals to Andrew's conscience became manipulative guilt tactics, while my references to protecting people from prejudice were reframed as attempts to weaponize racial politics. The recordings of their bigoted behavior were dismissed as obvious fabrications, while my pleas for family unity were transformed into evidence of stalking behavior and continued harassment despite my medical condition. She sold this heavily doctored video to a prominent national gossip news channel, framing it as an exclusive look into the deteriorating mental state of an elderly academic obsessed with destroying her own family. The segment aired with dramatic music and sensational headlines, "Dying Woman's Desperate Delusions," and "When Political Correctness Becomes Family Destruction." The impact was immediate and devastating. My genuine suffering, my documented evidence of their hatred, was transformed into proof of my mental instability. The audio recordings that should have exposed their cruelty were presented as elaborate fabrications created by a paranoid mother who was terrorizing her own family from her hospital bed. Within 24 hours, Andrew appeared on national television in what may have been the most heartbreaking betrayal of our entire ordeal. Flanked by Arthur and Ethan, he spoke with practiced sorrow about his beloved mother's tragic decline. "It breaks our hearts to see her like this," Andrew said, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. The mother we knew, the respected scholar who taught us about different cultures, that person seems to be gone. What we're dealing with now is someone who's become obsessed with forcing her political agenda on everyone around her, even when it tears families apart. He brought Ethan on camera for maximum emotional impact, my 17-year-old grandson, coached to perfection as he looked directly into the lens with practiced concern. "We just want Grandma to get the professional help she desperately needs," Ethan said, his young voice trembling with false sincerity. "It's hard to watch someone you love become someone you don't recognize, but we have to think about protecting our family from destructive influences, even when those influences come from people we used to trust." Arthur appeared in supporting segments, offering subtle endorsements of their narrative, while positioning himself as a responsible family patriarch who supported evidence-based decision-making over emotional manipulation. The performance was flawless, a symphony of manipulation that painted them as grieving family members struggling with an impossible situation, while I was portrayed as a dangerous, delusional woman who posed a threat to everyone around me. But somewhere in the darkness of my despair, another light began to shine. Dr. James Chen, a retired cultural diversity consultant who had worked with me on several community integration projects over the years, had been following the story and was immediately suspicious of the sophisticated nature of the video manipulation. Working with Carmen Rodriguez and her growing network of allies, Dr. Chen began a systematic analysis of the doctored video that revealed clear evidence of digital manipulation. His expertise in cultural conflict resolution and his understanding of prejudice patterns allowed him to identify not just the technical aspects of the fraud, but the psychological manipulation techniques being used against me. This isn't just family dysfunction, Dr. Chen explained during a secure phone call to my legal team. This is systematic cultural oppression using modern technology and media manipulation. The level of sophistication suggests a coordinated campaign with professional guidance from people who understand how to weaponize prejudice. His analysis also uncovered preliminary evidence linking Mark and Brenda to potentially fraudulent financial dealings involving my stolen retirement funds, irregularities that suggested their cultural heritage center had been funded through questionable transfers of assets that should have been protected for my care. But perhaps most importantly, Dr. Chen's investigation had attracted the attention of federal authorities who specialized in elder abuse and hate crime investigations. The scope and sophistication of my family's scheme had crossed legal thresholds that triggered automatic investigations by agencies with the power to expose their lies and hold them accountable. Late one night, as I lay in my hospital bed feeling utterly defeated, a nurse slipped me a note from Dr. Chen. "Susan, we know the video was doctored. We have the evidence. Federal investigators are asking questions about the financial transfers and the hate crime elements. Hold on just a little longer." The message was brief, but it carried the weight of hope. Somewhere beyond the walls of my isolation, beyond my family's lies and manipulation, real investigators were assembling the truth piece by piece. The same professional expertise that had once been my career was now being used to expose the fraud and hatred being perpetrated against me. The public humiliation was devastating, but it had also exposed my family and their conspirators to scrutiny from experts who couldn't be bought, manipulated, or intimidated. Their overconfidence, their willingness to take their deception to a national stage, might finally be the mistake that brought them down. As I closed my eyes that night, I held on to Dr. Chen's words like a prayer. The truth was coming, and with it, justice, for the mother who had been betrayed by the very family she tried to teach about love acceptance and the courage to stand against hatred. 6 months after my near-fatal heart attack, as I slowly regained my strength in a secure rehabilitation facility, the miracle I'd prayed for finally arrived. Dr. James Chen's investigation had uncovered something extraordinary, a forgotten anthropological research grant I documented decades ago, money that had been sitting untouched in a university endowment fund. Combined with Carmen Rodriguez's resources and donations from former colleagues who refused to believe the lies about my character, there was enough money to hire the legal team I desperately needed. Within days, we launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Mark and Brenda for elder abuse, fraud, cultural defamation, and the systematic manipulation of my grandchildren. The case immediately attracted global attention, not just because of the viral videos that had painted me as a delusional extremist, but because it represented something larger: the systematic abuse of elderly people by family members who exploit cultural divisions for personal gain while destroying those who stand for understanding and acceptance. The courtroom was packed on the day that would either vindicate me completely or seal my fate forever. Cameras from major news networks focused on the proceedings, broadcasting live to millions of viewers around the world. I sat with my legal team, my hands steady, now that I had allies fighting beside me, watching as my attorney prepared to present the evidence that would expose my family's crimes. "Your Honor," my attorney announced, "we would like to present audio evidence that will demonstrate the systematic elder abuse and cultural manipulation perpetrated against Dr. Susan Martinez by the defendants." The silence in the courtroom was absolute as the first recording began to play. My professional dictation device, disguised as a decorative ornament on my mantelpiece, had captured everything with crystal clarity. Mark's voice filled the courtroom raw with hatred and bigotry as he spoke about Maria during one of our family confrontations. What a low-class foreigner, she's probably here, illegally, probably has diseases, probably can't even read English properly. These people come here and try to take over everything we've built. The recording continued, capturing his systematic plan to isolate me from the family. If we can prove Mom's losing her mind, we can get control of her finances and make sure she stops embarrassing us with her bleeding heart liberal garbage. She's always been too soft on these people. Brenda's voice followed, equally chilling in its calculation. I'll handle the financial transfers while you work on getting the restraining order. Once we control her money, we can fund the Heritage Center and establish ourselves as real community leaders. Your mother's political correctness has been holding this family back for years. But it was the recordings of my grandchildren that truly devastated the courtroom. Ethan's voice, coached by his parents, but delivered with teenage conviction. Grandma's always forcing us to pretend these foreigners are just as good as us. It's so embarrassing when she makes us be nice to people who don't belong here. Chloe's giggling response was even more heartbreaking. I know, right? Like, why can't she just admit that some cultures are better than others? We're Americans, not whatever weird country that lady is from. The raw bigotry, the chilling callousness, the complete dismissal of everything I'd tried to teach them about human dignity, all of it was laid bare before the court and the world. These weren't the voices of people struggling with complex cultural questions. These were the voices of people who had embraced hatred and were teaching it to the next generation. Arthur sat in the gallery, his face growing paler with each revelation. When the prosecutor played recordings of him expressing support for Mark's campaign against me, something inside my husband broke. The man who had spent 35 years passively enabling first his own moral failures and then his family's cruelty finally confronted the truth about what we'd all become. I see now, Arthur said, standing up in the courtroom with tears streaming down his face. I've been blind. My son has lost his way, and I let it happen. I stood by while they destroyed the woman who spent her life teaching us to be better people. My wife is right. She's always been right. His public awakening was both vindication and heartbreak proof that redemption was possible, but at such a terrible cost. Arthur's breakdown revealed the depth of the guilt he'd been carrying, not just about his own hidden sins, but about his failure to protect me when I needed him most. When Mark was called to testify, the confident manipulator who had orchestrated my public destruction looked like a broken man as he approached the witness stand. The prosecutor played recording after recording of his own voice, revealing the systematic nature of his bigotry and his calculated plan to destroy me. I didn't mean, he stammered, his composure cracking like glass. As the full weight of his crimes was laid bare before the world, Mark suffered a complete psychological collapse. He began sobbing uncontrollably, his body shaking as he tried to form coherent words. I just wanted them to go away. He wailed, his mask of righteous tradition finally stripped away. I wanted our family to be normal, to be like it used to be before all this diversity stuff. Why couldn't Mom just let us be who we are? The raw honesty of his breakdown was more damning than any evidence we could have presented. Here, finally, was the truth. His attack on Maria and me had been motivated not by legitimate concerns about family stability, but by pure bigotry and his inability to accept that love transcends cultural boundaries. Brenda's attempt to flee the courtroom was captured by every camera present, her careful facade dissolving into desperate panic as bailiffs escorted her back to face the consequences of her actions. The woman who had orchestrated much of the financial fraud and media manipulation was finally being held accountable for her crimes. As the judge prepared to deliver his verdict, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The truth had finally been revealed, but at such a terrible cost. A family had been shattered, reputations destroyed, children poisoned with hatred. Justice was coming, but it would be a bittersweet victory in a war that should never have been fought. The woman who had spent her career studying how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary cruelty when they embrace prejudice had finally proven that she wasn't the monster her own family had claimed she was. The evidence was overwhelming the truth, undeniable, and vindication was finally within reach. But more than personal justice, this moment represented something larger, proof that hatred cannot win when good people are willing to stand up and fight for what's right, even when the cost is everything they hold dear. The court's verdict was swift and uncompromising, a complete vindication that echoed through every corner of my shattered life. Judge Maria Santos delivered her ruling with the gravity befitting such a profound betrayal of family trust and systematic cultural persecution. This court finds the defendants guilty of criminal emotional abuse, cultural defamation, parental alienation, and elder exploitation. She announced her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The evidence presented demonstrates a calculated campaign to destroy Dr. Susan Martinez's reputation and livelihood while systematically teaching children to embrace prejudice and hatred. Mark received a sentence of 7 to 12 years in federal prison for his primary role in the conspiracy, along with complete forfeiture of any claim to my stolen assets. Brenda was sentenced to 5 to 10 years, her role as architect and financial manipulator, earning her substantial prison time despite her attempts to minimize her involvement. The financial restitution was comprehensive, every penny they'd stolen from me, plus punitive damages, legal fees, and compensation for the emotional trauma they'd inflicted. The $200,000 from my retirement savings, the fraudulent transfers to fund their heritage center, the legal costs of fighting their lies, all of it was restored with interest. But more important than the monetary compensation was the formal judicial recognition of my character and professional integrity. Judge Santos's statement was read into the permanent record, explicitly dismantling the false narrative of my mental decline and political extremism. Dr. Susan Martinez, she declared, has demonstrated throughout these proceedings the same intellectual rigor, ethical integrity, and compassionate dedication that characterized her distinguished career as an ethnographic curator. The court finds that the defendant's characterization of Dr. Martinez as mentally unfit was a deliberate fabrication designed to facilitate their criminal enterprise while promoting cultural hatred. Those words felt like resurrection. After months of being portrayed as a dangerous extremist whose love for diversity had become mental illness, the highest legal authority in the land had declared me sound of mind and the victim of a sophisticated hate crime. The media coverage was extensive, but this time it told the real story. Headlines proclaimed anthropologist vindicated in family hate crime case and elder abuse conspiracy exposed through hidden evidence. The same news outlets that had once presented me as a cautionary tale about political correctness gone wrong now celebrated my courage in standing against bigotry. From his prison cell, Mark sent me a rambling, desperate letter that revealed the true depths of his psychological collapse. The confident bigot who had orchestrated my public destruction was now a broken man facing the consequences of his hatred. "Dear Mom," he wrote in shaky handwriting, "I know you probably never want to hear from me again, and I don't blame you. I keep thinking about what I did, how I convinced myself that you were the enemy, when really I was just scared of a world that was changing too fast for me to understand. The other inmates know what I did. They don't look kindly on people who abuse their families or spread hate. I have nothing left, no respect, no future. Can you ever forgive me? Can you help me understand how I became such a monster?" Reading his letter, I felt not satisfaction, but profound sadness. This broken man had once been the little boy I'd carried through museums, teaching him about the beauty of human diversity. His choices had destroyed not just my life, but his own potential to be the good person I'd tried to raise. Brenda's isolation was complete and absolute. Abandoned by her former social circles, ostracized by anyone who had once known her, she languished in prison, consumed by bitterness and rage. Unlike Mark's desperate pleas for understanding, Brenda remained defiant, apparently still convinced that she had been justified in her hatred and greed. But the most meaningful part of my recovery involved Arthur's journey toward redemption. My husband sought me out just days after the verdict appearing at my temporary residence, with tears streaming down his face and a profound humility I'd never seen in him before. "Susan," he sobbed, falling to his knees in front of me, "I am so sorry. I was scared and weak, and I let Mark convince me that you were the problem when really I was just too cowardly to face the truth about what our family had become. I abandoned you when you needed me to stand up for what we both knew was right." Arthur's remorse was genuine and complete. He committed himself to making amends, becoming my steadfast advocate for cultural understanding, and spending his remaining years trying to undo the damage his passivity had enabled. He took over many of the responsibilities for community outreach, visiting schools and community centers to speak about the dangers of family-based prejudice. Andrew's transformation was equally profound. My younger son, deeply impacted by the trial and his brother's downfall, sought me out privately with his own profound apology. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "I let fear make me weak. I let Mark's hatred infect me because it was easier than standing up for Maria and for you. I abandoned the woman I love and the mother who taught me to be better than that. I want to rebuild our relationship, and I want to rebuild my relationship with Maria on a foundation of respect and genuine love." Andrew's commitment was demonstrated through actions rather than just words. He immediately reconnected with Maria, apologizing for his betrayal and asking her to be part of rebuilding our family on principles of acceptance and understanding. Their relationship, tested by fire, emerged stronger than before. The most surprising source of healing came from my grandchildren. Ethan and Chloe, now 18 and 16, had been as traumatized by the revelations as anyone. The parents they trusted had lied to them, manipulated them, used them as weapons against their grandmother, while teaching them to hate people who were different from them. Ethan was the first to reach out, appearing at my door one afternoon with tears in his eyes and a handwritten letter of apology. "Grandma, Susan," he said, his voice breaking, "I said terrible things about you and about Maria. I believed all those lies about you being crazy and about Maria being dangerous. I want to learn the real truth about culture and diversity, not the hate Dad taught me." Chloe followed soon after, her young face marked by guilt and confusion. "I feel so stupid, Grandma," she cried. "I made those awful videos calling your work old-fashioned, when really you were trying to teach us how to be better people. I want to understand what you really believe, not what Dad told me You believed. Their visits became regular, tentative at first, but growing warmer as we rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty and genuine cultural curiosity. I told them stories about my fieldwork, about the beautiful diversity of human cultures, about the real history of immigration and cultural exchange in America. They listened with hungry attention, as if trying to replace the poison they'd been fed with authentic understanding. The legal victory was complete, my assets restored, my reputation vindicated. But the emotional reality was more complex, tinged with loss and regret. Mark and Brenda were in prison, their lives destroyed by their own choices. Arthur and Andrew were working hard to rebuild trust, but the relationships would never be what they once were. Still, as I sat in the rehabilitation facility's family room, watching Arthur help plan our next community cultural event, while Andrew and Maria quietly discussed their plans for the future, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. The truth had won, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my voice and my right to define what family really means. Love isn't about shared blood or cultural similarity. It's about respect, acceptance, and the courage to defend each other against hatred, even when that hatred comes from people who share your name. I was Susan Martinez, and I'd spent my career studying how communities heal from the wounds of prejudice. My final case, healing my own family, had given me a platform to help other families choose love over fear, understanding over ignorance. 3 years later, I stood in my meticulously restored kitchen, watching the morning sun stream through windows that once again belonged to me. But this time the light illuminated something far more beautiful than just reclaimed possessions. It shone on a home that had been transformed from a battlefield of bigotry into a sanctuary of vibrant cultural exchange. My victory was not just legal or financial. It was spiritual, a complete transformation of my family's understanding of what love really means. The woman who had been publicly destroyed for defending human dignity had returned not just vindicated, but enhanced by the fire of adversity into someone stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than she had ever been before. My home had become a gathering place for people from all backgrounds, frequently filled with the laughter and conversations of friends from dozens of different cultures. Arthur and I hosted monthly cultural connection dinners where neighbors could share their traditions, their foods, their stories. What had once been the site of Mark's hateful outburst against Maria was now a place where diversity was celebrated rather than feared. Arthur's transformation had been the most surprising gift of our ordeal. My husband, freed from the burden of his secrets and his passive complicity, had blossomed into the partner I'd always hoped he could be. He'd thrown himself into learning about cultural sensitivity and community building, becoming my strongest advocate and most dedicated student. I spent 35 years being afraid, he often told the groups we spoke to about family reconciliation. Afraid of my own failures, afraid of change, afraid of standing up for what I knew was right. That fear nearly cost me the most precious thing in my life, my wife's respect and love. Don't let fear turn you into someone you'll be ashamed to face in the mirror. Our relationship had evolved into something profound and authentic, built on Arthur's genuine remorse and his daily commitment to being the man he should have been all along. We work together now as true partners, united in purpose and strengthened by the honesty that had been missing from our marriage for so long. Andrew's relationship with me had also blossomed into something beautiful and genuine. My younger son had not only apologized, but had spent 3 years proving his commitment to the values I'd tried to teach him. He and Maria had married in a ceremony that celebrated both their cultures, creating exactly the kind of beautiful cultural bridge that Mark had tried so hard to destroy. I want our children to grow up in a world where love isn't limited by the color of someone's skin or the country where they were born, Andrew told me during one of our weekly dinners. I want them to have a grandmother who teaches them about the beauty of human diversity, not the fear of it. Maria had become not just my daughter-in-law, but one of my closest friends and collaborators. Together, we developed cultural exchange programs for local schools, sharing our respective expertise to help children understand that differences are sources of strength rather than division. Her Mexican heritage had enriched our family immeasurably, bringing new traditions, new perspectives, and new sources of joy. "You saved me from giving up on love," Maria often told me. "When your family attacked me, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong here. But you showed me that real family isn't about where you're born, it's about who's willing to fight for you when others try to tear you down." My grandchildren had undergone their own remarkable transformation. Ethan and Chloe, through ongoing therapy and our rebuilt relationship, had become young adults who valued understanding over prejudice, inclusion over exclusion. They regularly volunteered with our cultural programs and had become passionate advocates for diversity in their schools. "Grandma," Chloe said during one of our Sunday dinners, "I'm so sorry for all those awful things I said about Maria and about your work. I understand now that you weren't trying to force weird ideas on us. You were trying to teach us how to be good people." Ethan had taken his transformation even further, choosing to study anthropology in college with the goal of continuing the work I'd started. "I want to undo the damage Dad did," he told me. "I want to spend my life building bridges instead of walls." Even Mark's situation, while tragic, had become a source of hope rather than despair. His letters from prison showed genuine change and growing understanding of how his hatred had poisoned not just our family, but his own soul. While full reconciliation remained uncertain, his journey toward understanding gave me hope that redemption was possible even for those who had fallen furthest into darkness. My greatest satisfaction came from the national platform I'd gained through surviving my family's hate. I had become a leading voice in the fight against family-based prejudice and the importance of standing up for cultural understanding even when the cost is enormous. The memoir I'd written about my experience, Bridges Built from Ashes, A Family's Journey from Hate to Hope, had become required reading in sociology and family studies programs across the country. The book's success had led to speaking engagements, consulting work, and advocacy with organizations working to heal communities divided by prejudice. Carmen Rodriguez had become not just an ally, but a dear friend, and together we'd established a foundation that provided support for families torn apart by cultural conflicts. Our organization offered mediation services, educational resources, and legal assistance for people facing discrimination from their own relatives. Dr. James Chen continued to work with us on research into family dynamics and cultural conflict, using our case as a model for understanding how prejudice can be transmitted through generations and how it can be interrupted by people willing to take a stand. As I sat in my garden that evening, watching Arthur tend to the flowers we'd planted to represent every culture that had touched our lives, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this place. The woman who had been nearly destroyed by family betrayal bore little resemblance to the woman who now called this house home. I had been broken down to my very foundation and rebuilt stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than before. The betrayal had taught me that love without courage is meaningless, that silence in the face of hatred is complicity, and that family unity built on exclusion and fear is no unity at all. Most importantly, I had learned that survival is not enough. The goal was not simply to endure prejudice and hatred, but to transform the experience into something valuable, something that could help other families choose love over fear, understanding over ignorance. The relationship with my family would never be what it once was. The innocent assumptions about shared values had been destroyed by their choices, replaced by something more complex, but ultimately more honest. We were building something new together, founded on genuine respect rather than assumed loyalty. As the sun set behind the mountains I'd gazed at for so many years, I felt a peace I had never known before. This was not the peace of the unopposed, but the peace of someone who had stood against hatred and emerged victorious, not just for herself, but for the principle that love truly can conquer fear. The truth had set me free, but more than that, it had set my entire family free to become the people we were meant to be all along. Years have passed since my family's attempt to destroy me for standing against their prejudice. And as I sit in my office this morning, surrounded by thank you letters from families we've helped heal and planning documents for our cultural exchange programs, I can honestly say that I have found a peace deeper than any I knew before this ordeal began. My home is once again my sanctuary, but it is more than that now. It has become a beacon for others who face similar battles, a place where cultural understanding is celebrated and families learn that love transcends all boundaries. The woman who was once publicly humiliated as a dangerous extremist now serves as a national expert on healing family divisions caused by prejudice, her voice carrying weight precisely because she survived what so many others cannot. The relationships I've rebuilt with Arthur, Andrew, Maria, and my grandchildren are stronger than what we lost, built on honesty rather than assumption, respect rather than fear. We visit cultural sites together, now a united family that has learned the difference between genuine tradition and manufactured hatred, between love and toxic loyalty. The work I've thrown myself into has become my greatest achievement, helping thousands of families choose understanding over prejudice, inclusion over exclusion. Every workshop we lead, every family we reunite, every child we teach about the beauty of diversity is proof that courage and compassion can triumph over fear and manipulation. The relationship with Mark remains forever changed, a cautionary reminder of how quickly love can be poisoned by hatred. His letters from prison show genuine remorse and growth, but trust once shattered by bigotry takes generations to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. The greatest lesson I learned through this nightmare is that our worth as human beings does not depend on others' acceptance of our values. Self-respect cannot be stolen, it can only be surrendered. I had allowed others to question my sanity, to weaponize my love for my family, to reduce my life's work to dangerous political extremism. But in the end, the truth that mattered most was the truth I knew about myself, that I was a woman who chose love over fear, understanding over ignorance, courage over comfort. To those who hear my story and recognize their own struggles within it, I offer this: you are not alone. The family betrayals that break your heart, the relatives who choose prejudice over love, the isolation that comes from standing up for what's right. These are not uncommon experiences. They are the growing pains of a society learning to embrace its beautiful diversity against the resistance of those who profit from division. But more than that, I want you to know that transformation is possible. Love has a power that no hatred can overcome permanently. Understanding may be delayed, but it will not be denied to those who fight for it with courage and persistence. Your voice matters. Your values have worth. Your stand against prejudice creates ripples that can change the world. The authentic happiness I have found is not the simple contentment of an unchallenged life, but the profound satisfaction of a life reclaimed through struggle, a family healed through confronting hard truths, and a legacy secured not through what was given to me, but through what I chose to build from the ashes of what others tried to destroy. That is the gift hidden within even the cruelest family betrayal, the opportunity to discover who you really are when everything else is stripped away, and the chance to build something beautiful and lasting from the rubble of what hatred tried to demolish.